Behind the frozen shelves, a very fresh corpse. Wolfe takes the case. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Let's connect. Drop a comment with your location. Hearing from you brings these mysteries to life. Let's go. I was on my way up from the basement pantry with a dozen freshly blanched squash blossoms wrapped in a towel. Fritz's idea, not mine, when the buzzer rang. That buzzer doesn't just signal a visitor. It slices through the sacred brownstone air like a hatpin through a balloon. I froze on the second step, blossoms in one hand, towel in the other, and wondered what brand of lunatic was brave or dumb enough to hit that bell before noon on a Tuesday. Fritz poked his head out from the kitchen, eyebrows lifted. He's used to me playing doorman, but even he knew the timing was off. I didn't answer him. I just veered into the front hall and buzzed the door lock with my thumb. The door opened, and in walked the kind of trouble that looks tidy from the knees up but carries hell in her pocketbook. She was 40 if she was a day, wearing a trench coat like it had been custom draped over a conscience. Her shoes were tan, polished, and walked with the confidence of someone who believed in court orders and consequences. Her face was all angles and efficiency. She looked like a prosecutor on a lunch break. "Mr. Wolfe?" she asked, scanning the room like we kept detectives under glass. "You're speaking to the junior partner," I told her. "Archie Goodwin. What kind of trouble are we talking?" Her eyes didn't smile. "My name is Marlene Whitaker. I need a private consultation. It's sensitive." Naturally. They always say that. It's never, "I made a mess and need a mop." It's always sensitive. But the blossoms were still warm, and I had a feeling Wolfe would want to see this one for himself, even if she didn't come with butter sauce. I gestured toward the office. "Follow me. Don't step on the Persian. It has a longer temper than Mr. Wolfe, but not by much." She didn't flinch. A cool customer. Wolfe was at his desk, arms at rest on the chair's padded arms, an open copy of Plantarum Vasculorum Catalogus before him, which meant we were in Latin territory. His eyes didn't lift until I cleared my throat. "Miss Marlene Whitaker," I said, and added, "She says it's sensitive." Didn't specify if it bleeds. Wolfe shifted just enough to acknowledge her presence, not enough to endanger the chair's cushions. "Sit," he said. She did, without waiting for me to pull out the red armchair. She was not the type to wait for anything. "I represent a private philanthropic institution," she said, "the Aldous Kramer Foundation. You've never heard of it because you weren't meant to. We specialize in targeted endowments, educational, medical, environmental." Wolfe's gaze did a slow, slanted drift over her. "You said sensitive. You may proceed to relevant." She nodded. "Yesterday, the executive director, Daniel Voss, was found dead." Wolfe's brows didn't twitch. "Then I presume the police have been notified unless the corpse was composted." She didn't blink. "He was found in the cold storage pantry of our administrative annex, locked from the outside. Our office manager went looking for frozen puff pastry and found Daniel instead." That made Wolfe grunt, which in our line of work is the equivalent of a standing ovation. I folded my arms. "So why us? Why not let the boys downtown sort it out?" Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. "Because they already think they have. They say it was an accident." He slipped, hit his head. "No sign of forced entry. The door can be locked manually or electronically. They've called it a freak refrigeration mishap." "Which you doubt," Wolfe said. "Which I refuse to accept," she replied sharply. "Daniel was meticulous, paranoid even. He wouldn't have walked into a cold pantry without someone knowing, and he never touched frozen pastries. That, apparently, was the Foundation's version of sacrilege." Wolfe closed the Latin book with a sound that might have been a sigh or a death knell. "I abhor meddling in accidents," he said, "but I detest false categorization more. Why not simply engage a second pathologist?" "Because," she said, The board wants the matter buried. Quietly. If I push for another autopsy, they'll shut me out and tell the papers Daniel overdosed on ambition. I couldn't help it. Did he? No, she snapped. He was clean. He was difficult, abrasive. But he was brilliant. Wolfe studied her. Your relation to him? Her voice dropped a decibel. He was my ex-husband. Ah, there it was. Not just professional grief, personal guilt too. And a sliver of something else. Regret, maybe. Or unfinished business. Wolfe leaned back, his fingertips forming a steeple. That meant he was interested. If they tapped Morse code on that chair, it would have spelled curious. You believe it was murder, he said. Yes. But no evidence, no police suspicion, no open inquiry. She hesitated. One thing. The freezer's digital log. It was wiped yesterday afternoon, right after they found him. That got Wolfe's full attention. His voice lost some of the baritone velvet and took on an edge. Convenient. She nodded. I can't get the board to care, but if I had you, they'd have to listen. Wolfe was quiet. Then, the fee will be substantial. I've brought a check, she said, already reaching into her bag. I know your rates. Which was a minor miracle. Most walk-ins had no idea what they were in for, financially or otherwise. Wolfe glanced at me. Archie, record the details. Then take Miss Whitaker's statement in full. You will also need to visit this annex, of course. Sure, I said. Just what I wanted. A tour of death by puff pastry. Wolfe ignored me. I will want the names of all current staff, especially any with reason to resent Mr. Voss. Marlene stood. There's a few. He ran the foundation like a private chessboard. Everyone was a pawn except him. I escorted her to the door. She didn't look back. When I returned, Wolfe had already turned to his orchid catalog. She's not lying, I said. No, he replied. But she is hiding something. Which part? That, Wolfe said mildly, is why you will be earning your salary today. I glanced down at the towel of squash blossom still dangling from my hand, and here I thought I already had. He didn't answer, which meant the game was on. Whether or not it involved puff pastry, I was headed into the cold. I didn't get more than 3 sips into my coffee before Wolfe rang for me. That's his way. Let a man think he's off duty, then call him in just when the toast hits butter. I brought my cup with me into the office, because I'm no fool and because caffeine makes dealing with Nero Wolfe slightly less fatal. He was still seated at his desk, the orchid catalogue replaced by a clean sheet of foolscap and a pen that hadn't written anything yet. When Wolfe uses blank paper, it means he's organizing ideas. Or getting ready to. He didn't look up when I came in. You will call Saul Panzer, he said, and ask him to verify the death of Daniel Voss with whatever public or private means he prefers. I want a timestamp, official cause, and an obituary, if any. I nodded. You think Marlene Whitaker might be selling us a pretext? I think, Wolfe said, that she is offering a story she believes will engage me, which is not the same thing as the truth. That sounded about right. Her voice had been too flat, too polished. Not like she was lying, but like she'd told the story so many times to herself, she didn't realize the parts she left out. I made the call. Saul answered on the second ring. No pleasantries, just his usual Panzer, which translates roughly to get to the point. I'm already on another one. I told him what Wolfe wanted. Got it, he said. I'll call back in an hour. That gave me just enough time to finish my notes on Marlene's visit. I'd written down the highlights during our chat, but now typed them properly on Wolfe's battered Remington. I summarized the details as I understood them. Daniel Voss, executive director of a quiet little foundation with big money and low publicity, had been found dead in a cold pantry by an office manager looking for puff pastry. The door was locked from the outside. The digital entry log had been wiped. Wolfe read the typed page in silence. When he was done, he tapped a knuckle on the corner. Your impressions? She's not theatrical, but she's hiding something under all that. Starch, I said. She didn't flinch when you asked if it was murder, but she didn't seem particularly grief-stricken either. Cool as dry gin. Indeed, and you believe she was sincerely interested in Voss's welfare. His posthumous welfare, maybe. That got me a rare smirk from him. Motive? Reputation, maybe. Or leverage. If she still works at that foundation, she's got reasons to protect it, or position herself for a promotion. Wolfe frowned at that. It would be an unusually indirect stratagem. Or she just wants to settle a score. You saw her face when she said his name. I did. Wolfe steepled his fingers. You will go there this afternoon. The annex. Speak with the staff. Observe the space. I want a full report on its layout and the people within it. Ask questions that seem casual. Offer no theories. Learn who had access to that pantry and who benefited from Mr. Voss's departure. I raised my eyebrows. You think someone tampered with the door, made sure he got stuck inside? It is plausible, Wolfe said. The detail about the puff pastry was affected, meant to seem incidental, which is usually a sign it is not. I'll bring a scarf, I said. Cold pantry sounds like a three-coat visit. Wolfe didn't respond, which was consent enough. I left, grabbed my coat, and headed for the garage. The foundation's annex was on the east side, tucked behind a historic row house district and pretending not to have money. The building looked like an accountant's retirement fantasy. Grey limestone, soft lighting, and a discreet plaque beside the door that read, "The Aldous Kramer Foundation," in serif type so tasteful it nearly disappeared. Inside, the place was all hushed rugs and modern efficiency. The receptionist looked like she'd come straight from a corporate etiquette seminar. I gave her my name, and when I told her I was following up on Miss Whittaker's inquiry, her lips tightened like she'd just bit into an unripe grape. She's not in today, she said. Are you police? Nope, just nosy with a license, I said, flashing a grin and the card Wolfe insisted I carry, even if he thought licensing was vulgar. I was hoping to get a quick look at the layout, maybe ask a few questions about Daniel Voss. The name landed. Her posture stiffened. He died yesterday. We're all still adjusting. I don't doubt it. Can you tell me who found him? She glanced down at her desk like it had answers. Janice Rowe. She's the office manager. I jotted it down. And the pantry? In the back hall. Staff access only. Why? Curiosity, I said. And maybe the need to stay warm by walking fast. May I? She hesitated, then waved toward the hallway. Straight down. It's the last door before the mail room. I'll tell Janice you're here. The hall was long, paneled in a minimalist style that probably cost a bundle. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus, printer toner, and bureaucracy. At the end of it, I found the pantry. The door was steel, clean, and had a digital pad above the handle. Numbers, card reader, and a small green light. I tried the handle. Locked. Figures. A voice behind me said, "It's on a timer now. Since yesterday." I turned. Janice Rowe was maybe 50, short, with a practical haircut and no time for nonsense. Her blouse was crisp, and she carried a clipboard like it might bite if not restrained. "You must be Mr. Goodwin," she said. "Miss Whittaker said you might come." I nodded. "She also said you're the one who found him." Her mouth thinned. "Yes, around 4. I needed the pastry sheets for the board dinner tonight. Opened the door and, well, there he was. Collapsed. The overhead bulb was still on. I dropped everything." "Did you move him?" Number Y ran. Got Ellis, our deputy director. He called emergency services. "And the door was locked from the outside?" She looked annoyed. That's what I said. It was set to manual override for inventory purposes. We'd just had a restock. Anyone else have the code? All department heads. And Daniel, of course. I watched her. Did Daniel have enemies? Daniel had opinions. He didn't phrase them kindly. But murder? She shook her head. That's for books. Was he paranoid? Her eyes flicked away. He had routines. Password resets every 3 days. Laptops locked when he walked to the restroom. That sort, and you're certain he wouldn't have gone in there voluntarily. Not unless he wanted to lecture the puff pastry on fiscal responsibility. I smiled. Mind if I talk to Ellis next? She checked her watch. He's in a meeting. I can send him to you afterward. Do that. I took another glance at the door, the keypad, and the tiny green light winking at me like it knew something. I had a feeling Wolfe would want details, the kind I could only get by snooping. When I left the annex, my coat smelled like cold metal and expensive disinfectant. Saul had called while I was inside. I returned his call from the car. Confirmed, he said. Voss died around 4:15. EMT report says hypothermia, but the coroner logged it as blunt force trauma to the head. Probably slipped and fell, but here's the kicker. The impact wouldn't have killed him immediately. Cold did, which means, I said, he was conscious, injured, and trapped. Looks like it. I thanked him, hung up, and started the car. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was still in his chair, fingers laced on his belly. Well? He asked. He fell, hit his head. But that didn't kill him. The cold did. Which means someone locked him in, left him there, and cleaned up the entry log. Wolfe grunted. Malice disguised as accident. Often the preferred method in places where appearances matter more than truth. I sat down. You still think Marlene lied? I think, Wolfe said. She has not yet told us whom she suspects. Or why. Think she will? She must, Wolfe said, before someone else arranges for another frozen accident. He reached for the bell to summon Fritz, which meant the conversation and the squash blossom experiment were both about to resume, and the cold pantry wasn't done with us yet. The next morning, Wolfe called me into the office before I'd had a chance to finish the eggs Fritz had perfected over 3 years of experimenting with low heat and a stubborn copper pan. Fritz looked hurt, but I told him it was police business, which, in our house, means something serious enough to interrupt breakfast, but not enough to require Wolfe to stand. Wolfe was at his desk, of course. The newspaper was folded on the chair arm, untouched. That alone told me his mind was off orchids and onto corpses. You will arrange a meeting, he said, with Miss Whittaker, here this afternoon. I slid into my usual chair. Got a particular line of questioning in mind, or are we just having her over for tea and unsolved murder? She has withheld information, Wolfe said. Intentionally or not, I must determine. I suspect she knows who benefits most from Mr. Voss's death, but has reasons not to say. I tapped a pen on my knee. Could be she's scared or guilty. Precisely. He lifted his hand and added, I want you to visit the office again. Quietly. Observe. See who behaves differently now that they know Voss isn't coming back. Speak to the deputy director, Ellis. We need his version of events. Unfiltered. I nodded. You think he's the type to polish his answers? He runs a foundation dependent on appearances, Wolfe said. They all do. I gave her secretary another buzz and arranged for Marlene to come by at 3. No protest this time, just a clipped understood and a hang-up that managed to feel like a rebuke. Maybe they didn't like uninvited questions. Or maybe they were starting to squirm under the lid Wolfe had begun to lift. By noon I was back at the annex, this time with no squash blossoms and a sharper eye. The receptionist gave me a tired look, like she was already over this week's scandal and hoping for a quiet embezzlement next time. Ellis Monroe is expecting you, she said. and pointed me toward a conference room with glass walls and a table that looked like it had been carved from the regrets of bankrupt CEOs. Ellis Monroe stood when I entered, 40-ish, pressed shirt, perfect posture, smile set to polite but cautious. The type of man who has backup ties in his desk drawer and reads the minutes of meetings twice. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, shaking my hand. "I've heard you're working with Miss Whittaker." I gave him the smile I use when I want someone to underestimate me. "We're helping her ask a few questions, most of which seem to make people uncomfortable." He gestured for me to sit. "We're in the middle of a delicate transition. Daniel's loss, however it occurred, has affected everyone, and Miss Whittaker's approach has been unusually aggressive. Unusual for her or for grieving ex-wives in general." He paused, then gave a short laugh. "Marlene was never sentimental. She's efficient and ambitious. They weren't married long." "That's not what she said." He blinked. "She said, what?" I let the silence fill in the blanks. "You were here when they found him." "I was in my office. Janice called for help. I got there just before the EMTs." "See anything odd?" He leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. "Other than Daniel Voss lying face down in a freezer?" Number I watched him. "You said, however it occurred. That mean you've got doubts?" He tilted his head, weighing his words. "Daniel didn't take risks. He was methodical to the point of obsession. The idea of him going into the pantry without checking the temperature logs or making sure someone knew he was inside. It doesn't fit." "But you're not calling it murder." He met my eyes. "I'm saying it doesn't fit." Which was the polite way of saying someone was lying, but he didn't want to be the one to say it first. I asked a few more questions. Who else had pantry access? When the lock system had last been updated? Whether Daniel had any enemies that came in smiling? But Monroe was careful. Too careful. He kept things vague, managerial. Nothing that would upset the board or put his name next to scandal. When I asked who stood to gain the most from Daniel's death, he shook his head. "I know what you're implying, Mr. Goodwin, that this was internal, calculated. But foundations don't work like crime dramas. We don't fight over inheritances." "Sure," I said, rising. "You just fight over influence, budgets, and long-term power. Nice talking to you." He didn't walk me out. That was telling. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had moved from catalog to cheese. I gave him the rundown. "Ellis Monroe plays it clean," I said. "Too clean. Like he practices his answers." Wolfe sliced a sliver of mahon with surgical precision. Did he admit motive? No, but he didn't deny the opportunity. And he made sure to distance himself from Marlene's theory. That's a red flag. Indeed. Anyone who discredits a theory without offering one of their own is either frightened or complicit. I sank into the red chair. "So, what's your angle?" "I suspect," Wolfe said, "that Miss Whittaker's arrival was not motivated solely by grief or justice. She may be maneuvering or protecting someone. Either way, I want her to tell me whom she thinks is responsible." At 3 sharp, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered and led Marlene in without asking if we were ready. Wolfe sat, as always, unmoving but impossible to ignore. I watched her as she took her seat. Same trench coat, same sharp eyes. But something was tighter about her posture. She was expecting resistance. "I understand you've been asking questions," she said. "Yes," Wolfe replied. "That is how one arrives at answers." She gave a thin smile. "And have you arrived?" "Not yet," Wolfe said, "because you have not been candid." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't bristle. "About what?" "About your ex-husband, about his enemies, about the true nature of your involvement." "I told you," she began, but Wolfe lifted a hand and she stopped. "You told me he was difficult, brilliant, paranoid, but you didn't tell me he was planning to dissolve the Foundation's senior leadership board." or that he had started moving money out of the discretionary fund, or that he had named you interim director in a private memo the day before he died. Her breath caught. Barely. Where did you get that? I asked, Wolfe said simply, and people answered. I gave her credit. She didn't fold, but she did sit a little straighter. It's true, she said. Daniel was restructuring the board, cutting certain legacy positions. He said it was time the foundation aligned with its mission. Wolfe's tone cooled. And who opposed him? Half the board, she said. Maybe more. But they weren't the kind to kill. Wolfe's gaze was sharp. And yet someone erased the digital lock log and left him to die. She swallowed. That wasn't them. I'm sure of it. I stepped in. Then who? Her answer came slowly. There's someone you haven't met. Gina Pavich, Daniel's new assistant. Hired last month. Young, smart, efficient, but too close. He trusted her completely. Let her into everything. And you resented that? I asked. I worried, she said. She had access. She knew schedules, routines, and she's not as innocent as she looks. Wolfe let out a soft breath, not quite a sigh. That, he said, was the first useful thing you've told me. She stood. What will you do? I will summon the rest of your foundation's inner circle, Wolfe said, and I will speak to Miss Pavich. If your instincts are correct, she will prove enlightening. If not, then I will return to the pantry myself. Marlene looked startled. You? He arched a brow. Metaphorically, Mr. Goodwin prefers the actual refrigeration. I stood and showed her out. She left without a word, her steps brisk, her face unreadable. Back in the office, Wolfe sat back and folded his arms. Find this Gina Pavich, he said. Ask her what she was doing between 3 and 5 the day Daniel Voss died. And if she lies? Wolfe closed his eyes. Then we will invite her to dinner and discover if she can stand the heat. I found Gina Pavich at exactly 4:10 the next afternoon, standing in front of a bank of filing cabinets and pretending she didn't see me watching her. She was slender, sharp-featured, and wore a blazer that probably cost less than it looked. Her hair was pulled back so tight it gave her an expression of permanent alertness. She didn't jump when I introduced myself, but she did take a beat before smiling, a neat, polite little curve of the mouth that had more calculation than warmth behind it. You're the one Miss Whitaker sent, she said. The detective. I let that slide. I've been called worse. Archie Goodwin, I said, showing the license Wolfe made me renew every 2 years, even though we both know it's mostly for show. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the day Daniel Voss died. Her eyes didn't flinch. Of course. Which, translated from officeese, meant I've been rehearsing this all night. She motioned toward a smaller break room, empty except for a silent vending machine and a coffee pot that hadn't seen action since the Carter administration. We sat across from each other at the little table by the window. You were Mr. Voss's assistant? I asked. Yes. I was hired about 6 weeks ago. He wanted someone with both non-profit and legal experience. And you have both? 4 years at an environmental grant firm, law degree before that. But I left practice to do something less adversarial. I made a note. So when he died, she said calmly. I was on a Zoom call from 3 until just before 5. I was working from home that day. Daniel didn't need me in the office. He was reviewing board reports. He liked silence. I took out a notepad. Who was on the call with you? A partner at Ridgewood Legal. We were reviewing pending language for a sustainability endowment. You can verify it. I intend to. Tell me, what was your relationship with Mr. Voss like? Her jaw twitched. Not fear. Something closer to pride, quickly masked. Professional. Efficient. He appreciated that I didn't waste time. Did you like him? She folded her hands neatly. I respected him. but not enough to cry when he froze to death. She didn't blink. I've cried, just not in front of you. It wasn't a bad answer. A little sharp, but I wasn't here for softness. Miss Whitaker thinks you had too much access. That Daniel told you things he didn't tell others. Gina looked out the window. He trusted me. That bothered her. Why? She turned back, eyes cool. Because he used to trust her. I gave her that one. You knew about the digital log being wiped. I heard, but I didn't have access to the admin console. Only Daniel and the IT contractor could make deletions. Yet someone did. Apparently. And if it wasn't you? She leaned forward just enough to suggest annoyance, not fear. Mr. Goodwin, you've walked around this office. You've met these people. Half of them wanted Daniel gone, not dead, just out. They didn't like his reforms. He wanted transparency. They wanted inertia. Anyone in particular stand out? She hesitated, just slightly. Ellis Monroe, he kept things tidy. Daniel disrupted that. Janice Rowe, loyal to Ellis, never liked Daniel. She thought he micromanaged. I watched her. You're giving names awfully fast for someone who respected the guy. She held my gaze. Respect doesn't mean blindness. I took down every word. On my way out, I checked with the IT department, one guy with headphones and a degree in caffeinated stoicism, who confirmed that the deletion of the entry logs had been performed using Daniel's credentials after 4:30 remotely, which meant either Daniel somehow wiped his own entry log while unconscious on the freezer floor, or someone else had his password. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was nearly 6. Fritz was orchestrating a veal dish in the kitchen that smelled like a treaty between France and heaven. Wolfe was, as always, in the office, this time reading a treatise on soil pH and shouting for me by the time I'd taken off my coat. She didn't do it, I said, dropping into my chair. Of course not, Wolfe replied, not looking up. But she's a catalyst. That or a red herring with excellent grooming. She has an alibi. Zoom call, verified, time-stamped, with a witness. Wolfe finally looked at me. And yet someone used Mr. Voss's credentials to erase the entry log after his death. Explain. Either the killer had his password, I said, or they had access to a device already logged in, possibly his office laptop. Wolfe closed the book and tapped it once on the desk. You will return tomorrow and inspect the digital chain of custody. I want timestamps, device access, login locations. You will speak to this IT man again. What is his name? Dylan. Wolfe made a noise of distaste. Names that begin and end with consonants are rarely trustworthy. I'll pass that along. He reached for his glass of beer. This is no longer a question of whether Voss was murdered. He was. Now we must determine which of his enemies had the wit to disguise malice as error. I poured myself a splash from the bottle on the tray. Ellis and Janice looked good for it. Both had motive, both had access. But neither stands to gain as much as Marlene. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. She volunteered Miss Pavich's name with remarkable ease. You think she planted it? I think she misdirected. Whether deliberately or instinctively, we will see. The key will be the device used to access the pantry logs. And if it's gone, then we find who knew it would be. We didn't talk much during dinner. Wolfe rarely did when he was passing lies in his head. I recognized the mood. Something had tilted. A pattern had emerged, but not enough to snap into place. After dessert, he gave me one last instruction. Tomorrow, Mr. Goodwin, you will collect all digital records related to Daniel Voss's last day. Meeting schedules, email timestamps, device access logs. And one more thing. What's that? Ask Fritz for the cold pantry inventory. Ours, not theirs. I blinked. Planning a symbolic demonstration? No, Wolfe said. Planning a trap. One that depends on details. The kind no killer expects a gourmand to notice. He rose. slowly. That alone told me the case had reached his nerves. Nero Wolfe doesn't stand unless the world is out of alignment or he's about to correct it. The pantry, he said, was the scene. But the motive was written in the margins. He didn't explain further, which meant I had work to do before he told me how it ended. I was in Dylan, the IT guy's cramped alcove, by 9:20 the next morning. He'd relocated from a shared office to a corner nook beside the janitor's closet, probably for the peace and definitely not for the ambiance. A fan the size of a toaster hummed beside him while he poked at 3 monitors like he was diffusing something. "I need a minute," he said without looking up. I gave him 3. When he finally swiveled toward me, his hands still hovering over the keyboard, I held out Wolfe's card and did my best to look less annoying than the request I was about to make. "Mr. Wolfe wants access logs for the building's digital systems on the day Daniel Voss died. Pantry entry system, local server logins, anything you've got. Devices, password resets. You know, simple stuff." He gave me the look I usually get when I try to order rare wine at a diner. "That's not simple, and I'm not cleared to hand over internal data." I leaned against the wall. "Let's pretend for a second this isn't a murder investigation. Let's pretend it's a food safety issue. A freezer log gets wiped, someone dies. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Now let's pretend the person asking you is the one who knows which of your supervisors failed to maintain backups." He squinted. "You saying you can get me fired?" "I'm saying someone will, and it won't be me. I'm just the guy who asks questions and looks friendly enough to forget later." He chewed that over, then gave a small sigh and turned to his screen. "Okay, here's the activity report. This is from the access panel system. The logs are wiped as of 4:31 p.m. on the day in question." "Wiped from where?" "From the admin dashboard. Someone logged in from Daniel's credentials and deleted them manually." "From which device?" He clicked a few times. "Local login. IP address matches his office workstation, so not remote." "Nope." I scratched my chin. "So the person who deleted the log had to physically sit at his desk after he was dead. Or while he was dying. Even better." He pointed at the screen. "Here's the kicker. The admin panel logs don't match the building login system. At 4:28, someone used a keycard on Daniel's door. Guess whose ID?" "Don't make me guess. I'm not caffeinated enough." He tapped. "Janice Rowe." I blinked. "You're sure?" "Time-stamped, encoded, verified. That's not easy to fake. Unless someone stole her card, which hasn't been reported." I stood there a second, letting that settle. "Any chance she accessed his computer?" "Not unless she knew the password, or unless it was already logged in." "Was it?" "Can't tell. The system logs activity, not screen state. So someone could have walked in, found the computer open, and cleaned it up." "Yup. And if they knew the timing, they could make it look like Daniel did it himself." He nodded. "Only the card reader betrays them." I thanked him, made a copy of the relevant screenshots with his blessing, and a whispered vow to keep his name out of it, and left with the scent of burned coffee in my nostrils and suspicion on my breath. I didn't go back to the brownstone right away. Instead, I stopped at a nearby coffee shop, bought a scone out of pity, and flipped through my notes. Wolfe had called it from the beginning. The erased logs weren't cleanup. They were cover. And now we had a name. Janice Rowe. But why? I returned to the annex under the pretense of needing a quick word with the receptionist. She told me Janice was in the records room. Perfect. I found her elbow deep in a file drawer labeled Board Archives, 2018, and humming softly to herself. When I walked in, she jumped. "Sorry," I said. "Didn't mean to creep up." She forced a smile. "It's fine. You startled me." I leaned against the file cabinet. "You went into Daniel's office the day he died." Her fingers froze. I might have. I don't remember." Keycard says 4:28 p.m., 3 minutes before someone logged into his machine and wiped the pantry access logs. She blinked. Number, that's impossible. I didn't. You didn't wipe the logs. I didn't even know how. But you went in. Yes. Briefly. I was looking for a delivery form. He wasn't at his desk. I didn't touch anything else. I swear I watched her. She wasn't faking the fear, but she was hiding something. Maybe the reason she was in there. Maybe what she saw. Then how did his system get accessed? Did you leave the door open? She swallowed. Number, but Ellis was in the hall. Did he go in? I don't know. But she did. She just couldn't admit it yet. I thanked her and left before the sweat made it through her blouse. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was midway, through an argument with Fritz over a bottle of Beaujolais that had allegedly not been stored at the appropriate tilt. Fritz stormed out, and I took his place in the verbal firing line. Janice's keycard accessed Daniel's office at 4:28, I said. 3 minutes later, someone logged into his computer and wiped the freezer logs. Dylan confirms it was from Daniel's own workstation. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Janice? Claims she was looking for a delivery form. Says Ellis was in the hall. Wolfe sat back. Convenient. She was nervous, but not slippery. I don't think she did the deed. But she may have seen who did. Wolfe tapped a finger on the armrest. Ellis has motive, had opportunity, and just enough ego to think he could tidy things up and no one would notice. And yet he failed to account for the log redundancy, Wolfe muttered. Incompetent criminals are exhausting. I dropped the printed screenshots on Wolfe's desk. He gave them a cursory glance and then waved them away. Tomorrow morning, he said, I will invite all 4 to the office. Miss Whitaker, Mr. Monroe, Miss Rowe, and Miss Pavich. All of them? Yes. Together. I dislike repetition. I will speak once. They will listen. You planning a full reveal? Wolfe snorted. Number A, soft squeeze. A test of nerves. One of them will fracture. And if none do, he looked at me, then we will wait. And I will ask again, with better questions. Fritz brought the Beaujolais back in without comment. Wolfe sniffed it and approved with a grunt. Dinner that night was silent, heavy with expectation. Wolfe was thinking ahead, planning the psychological terrain of his next engagement. For him, confrontation was chess, with real blood on the line. He said nothing more that evening, but as I cleared the dishes, he looked up once and said, Mr. Voss believed cold storage was for pastry. Someone else thought it would do just as well for secrets. Then he turned back to his book, and I knew we were almost at the end. At 10:55 the next morning, all 4 suspects were seated in Nero Wolfe's office, on time, uncomfortable, and arranged like the cast of a play they hadn't auditioned for. Wolfe hadn't risen, naturally. He remained behind his desk in his massive chair, fingers steepled, eyes half-lidded, as if considering whether they were worthy of attention. Fritz had brought in chilled water for the guests. None of them drank it. Marlene Whitaker sat in the red armchair to the left, legs crossed tightly, her bag clutched like it contained either a resignation letter or a revolver. Gina Pavich was perched with precise poise on the leather settee, every button of her blouse aligned like a moral code. Janice Rowe sat nearest the door, small and rigid, hands folded in her lap and eyes flicking anywhere but at Wolfe. Ellis Monroe, ever the polished understudy to power, sat with his legs, neatly crossed, chin slightly lifted as if expecting a board meeting and not a verbal inquisition. I stood off to the side with my notebook and a pen I had no intention of using. Wolfe's voice would be the only instrument needed here. He let the silence stretch for just long enough. Then, without shifting his gaze, he began. This gathering is not voluntary. It is also not adversarial. Yet, each of you is here because you possessed access, motive, and knowledge, sufficient to either commit a murder or conceal one. Gina exhaled, slowly. Monroe tilted his head. Marlene didn't blink. Wolfe continued, Daniel Voss was found dead in your foundation's cold pantry. Officially, he slipped and died of exposure. This is a lie. One of you told it. I intend to identify which Janice shifted in her seat. I have no warrant, Wolfe said. No badge, only facts and their consequences. He turned his gaze slightly. Miss Rowe, on the afternoon of Mr. Voss's death, you entered his office at 4:28 p.m. Using your assigned keycard. You did not report this. Why? Janice's voice came small. I was ashamed. I panicked. Of what? Wolfe asked. I found him there, she said, lying on the floor. I thought he'd fallen or fainted. I didn't know he was in the pantry until later, but when I opened the office door, he was face down, still breathing. You did not call for help. I left to get Ellis. I told him. Then when I came back, he was gone. That made Wolfe's brow lift. Gone? Ellis said I was mistaken, that Daniel wasn't there. I thought maybe I imagined it. I didn't want to seem confused. Wolfe shifted to Ellis. Mr. Monroe, do you deny that she told you Mr. Voss was lying on the floor? Monroe gave a stiff smile. Of course I don't deny it. She was distraught. But there was no one there when I looked. Because, Wolfe said softly, you had already moved him. Silence. Monroe's lips parted, but no words followed. Wolfe's voice remained even. Daniel Voss was not found in the pantry by accident. He was placed there, alive injured, locked in. The logs were then erased from his workstation, which you accessed using a machine still logged in from earlier. And the door to his office, opened by Miss Rowe's card. Convenient. A trail that pointed nowhere. Gina leaned forward. Are you accusing him? I'm inviting him, Wolfe said, to explain. Ellis straightened. I didn't kill Daniel. No, Wolfe agreed. You panicked. Janice saw him collapsed. You realized if he recovered, he might expose your efforts to sabotage his restructuring. You'd been siphoning discretionary funds. Nothing overt, just enough to appear within margin. But Daniel had begun an audit. You moved him. You used his login to wipe the access records. You hoped the cold would kill him quietly. I didn't. Monroe stopped. Wolfe's voice hardened. You used Janice's moment of confusion to cover your act, and Miss Pavich's alibi to stall the timeline. Marlene spoke then. I knew it. I told you he was too clean. Wolfe's eyes turned to her. Number you didn't. You offered Gina's name first, not Ellis's. Marlene's eyes narrowed. Because I didn't know. You suspected. But you needed it done. You came to us not out of outrage, but to control the outcome. You wanted someone punished, but not necessarily the right person. Ellis is more useful to you gone than alive. Gina said nothing, but her gaze flicked between Wolfe and Marlene like a metronome ticking toward clarity. Ellis stood suddenly. You can't prove this. Wolfe didn't move. Number but Miss Pavich can. Gina looked startled. What? You were in the office the next morning. You checked Daniel's chair. You saw the login screen, and you told no one. Gina flushed. I didn't think it mattered. Wolfe shook his head. You didn't want to be involved. Ellis looked at her. You saw me. She didn't answer. Wolfe turned to me. Mr. Goodwin. I stepped forward and placed the printed access logs, screen captures, and time-stamped entries on the table. Monroe didn't touch them. Neither did anyone else. You knew, Wolfe said, that Daniel wouldn't walk into that pantry willingly. You knew only someone he trusted, or someone in the chain of command, could direct him there without question. He was injured, disoriented. Not dead. He may have begged you. Monroe's face had gone pale. I didn't think it would kill him, he said. Wolfe looked at him with something colder than contempt. Then you are twice a fool. Janice covered her mouth. Gina looked down. Marlene said nothing. I will not contact the police, Wolfe said. I assume Miss Whittaker will. She nodded slowly. I'll handle it. Ellis said nothing more. He sat back down, not defiant now, but smaller, shrinking. Wolfe dismissed them with a wave. They filed out silently, their departure more muted than their arrival. Only Gina lingered a moment, gave Wolfe a small nod, and followed the others. When the door closed, Wolfe exhaled. A long, precise breath. You were right, I said. He cleaned it up too perfectly. No, Wolfe said. He cleaned it up just imperfectly enough. I nodded. He panicked. He improvised. And improvisation, Wolfe said, is the mother of failure. He reached for the beer Fritz had brought in and poured. I sank into my chair and stretched. That it? Not quite, Wolfe said. You will write it up. Deliver it to Inspector Kramer personally. He'll love that. Wolfe snorted. As I rose, he added, and Mr. Goodwin, next time someone dies in a pantry, you may tell the coroner. The cold may preserve, but it also exposes. I tipped. An invisible hat. I'll be sure to put that in the memo. And with that, the brownstone returned to silence, as if nothing had ever chilled it to begin with. The brownstone never hums louder than in the silence after a case breaks. It's a particular kind of stillness, dense with the scent of camellia leaves curling in the sun upstairs, faint vinegar from Fritz's cleaned counters, and the low churn of Wolfe's mind transitioning from strategy to contemplation. I delivered the report to Kramer as ordered, along with the supporting documentation and a verbal summary delivered in the tone of a man who knows how much the inspector hates receiving neat packages tied with Wolfe's ribbon. Kramer hadn't thrown anything at me, which, by his standards, was affection. When I returned, I found Wolfe in the plant rooms. That alone told me the matter wasn't fully put to bed in his head. He was walking slowly through the rows, inspecting a trio of Miltoniopsis that hadn't quite opened. He didn't speak when I entered, so I waited, standing just far enough from the misters to avoid a surprise drizzle. He moved with care, tweaking a leaf here, tilting a pot half a degree there. Then, with no preamble, he said, "She will not survive it." I knew he meant Marlene Whittaker. "Prison?" I asked. "Number, reputation, control, the exposure of her ambition." "She didn't commit the murder." "No," Wolfe said, still adjusting a bloom. "But she invited it. Enabled it. She knew Ellis had both motive and instability. Her hands are clean, but her conscience should blister. She'll get a lawyer," I said. "Maybe even keep a board seat." "Which," Wolfe murmured, "would be poetic." He turned and began the slow descent back toward the stairs. I followed. He never liked to be followed in silence, but he liked interruptions less. We returned to the office, and he sank into his chair like a general stepping down after a long campaign. Fritz entered quietly with coffee, mine black, Wolfe's sugared and poured with a reverence that bordered on the monastic. "I'm surprised you didn't press her further," I said after a sip. "Marlene, I mean." "She was pressed," Wolfe said. "Just not in public. If she had denied awareness of Ellis's behavior, she would have invited scrutiny. But she did not. She said nothing. The omission was sufficient." I flipped through my notes. "Ellis will be charged with manslaughter, maybe second degree. The DA won't stretch it to premeditation." Wolfe nodded. "No need." It was not a calculated assassination. It was a preservation instinct gone rabid. "And Gina?" "She will move on," he said. Quietly. Likely somewhere far from foundations, boards, and cold storage. "And Janice?" "She will remain. Inert. Like most bureaucrats. The great institutional middle, neither wicked nor brave." I drummed the pen once on my knee. You ever wonder how many cases like this slip by? No bullets, no bodies in bathtubs, just someone left to freeze while the right people look the other way. No, Wolfe said. I do not wonder. I know. We sat for a long while after that, each of us marinating in our own brand of resignation. Wolfe doesn't like murder, and I don't like watching people dissolve from the inside out. But in our line of work, you learn not to expect better from people who wear titles like armor. The phone rang at 6:45. I picked it up. Nero Wolfe's residence, I said. The voice on the other end was dry, precise, and vaguely amused. This is Anita Law, from the Aldous Kramer Foundation. I imagine you know why I'm calling. I motioned to Wolfe and put the call on speaker. He leaned forward, only slightly. I know, he said. You are the board chair. Yes, and I've read your report. Carefully. Then you understand the implications. I do. I'm calling to say thank you. Quietly. Unofficially. Wolfe grunted. You will remove Miss Whittaker? Yes. And Mr. Monroe? We've asked him to resign. Officially, it will be health-related. There are limits to what we'll admit. We're not the Vatican. Wolfe made no comment on that. Anita continued. Your fee will be paid in full. Discreetly. That is expected. And your silence? That is not for sale, Wolfe said. But it is generally practiced unless provoked. There was a pause. Then Anita said, I see. I doubt it, Wolfe replied, but you may continue operating under that assumption. She hung up. I smiled. You enjoy terrifying, powerful people? No, Wolfe said. I enjoy reminding them that they are not immune. The doorbell rang precisely at 7:01. Fritz opened it, and a moment later, Marlene Whittaker stood in the office once more. This time without a trench coat or pretense. Just a woman whose expression looked like someone had dropped her ambition into a sink and run the cold tap. She sat without being asked. Wolfe nodded. I won't ask what you think of me, she said. You should, Wolfe replied. But I would not answer. She gave a bitter smile. He was a hard man, Daniel. Rigid, dismissive, but he wanted change. And you wanted power. I wanted permanence, she said. They pushed him. I watched. I let them. I thought if he fell, I'd be the one left standing. I didn't expect him to die. No one does, Wolfe said, except those who plan it. He didn't deserve that kind of death, she said quietly. No one does, Wolfe repeated. She stood, unsure now, something unmoored in her. Goodbye, Mr. Wolfe. Mr. Goodwin. She didn't wait for a reply. When the door shut behind her, Wolfe exhaled. Fritz brought dinner shortly after, braised duck with saffron rice and roasted carrots. We ate without much conversation, and when I rose to clear the dishes, Wolfe lifted his glass. To the cold, he said, where even lies grow brittle. I didn't clink, just nodded. Because in the brownstone, some truths don't need to be repeated, and the dead, even the difficult ones, deserve a final silence better than the one they were left in. The next morning broke with a thin sheen of July heat climbing over the windowsills, diffused by the stained glass panels Wolfe insisted stayed closed, regardless of season or murder rate. I came downstairs to find him already in the office, not reading, not eating, just sitting in his chair as though the chair itself were gathering the last threads of tension in the air like wool in a spindle. Cases leave residue, not always in blood or paperwork, but in the places people don't talk about. Quiet suspicions, small stains on conscience, the permanent stretch in your voice when you've said one thing too many and believed too little of it. Wolfe may have played the immovable observer, but I could tell something about this one had left a mark. Maybe it was the absence of a clear villain, or the fact that the villain had folded like a paper invoice, creased down the middle and handed back with apologies. I poured myself coffee and sat across from him. "No calls this morning," I said. "No headlines, no leaks. Looks like the Kramer Foundation prefers its scandals served cold." "That is unsurprising," Wolfe said. "Public disgrace undermines future donations. They will contain the matter." "And Marlene?" He grunted. "She will become a consultant, or disappear. Either way, she will survive." "You sound disappointed." "I am not," he said. "I am disillusioned." "You were already disillusioned." "Then I am now disillusioned further." I flipped open the small notebook I kept for things Wolfe might pretend not to need later. "You never said what tipped it." He looked over. "Tipped what?" "That it was Ellis. Before the card logs. Before the deletion records. You had a hunch early." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "It was not a hunch. It was syntax." "His wording?" "Yes. When you relayed his conversation, he said, 'It doesn't fit.' Not, 'It couldn't have happened.' That choice of language admits possibility while avoiding accountability. People who tell the truth generally say too much. People who lie by omission are concise." "Concise enough to trap a man." "No," Wolfe said. "He trapped himself. I merely recognized the outline of his cage." The doorbell rang. It wasn't the kind of ring we'd come to expect with trouble. No desperation, no hesitation, just a short, sharp buzz that said, "I know you're there, and I've already decided I'm coming in." I opened the door to find Gina Pavich, dressed in a charcoal blouse and carrying a single envelope in her left hand. She looked sharper than she had during. That got me a reply. Just one line. "I was right to leave, but someone still has to clean the bones." Wolfe read it in silence. "She knew," he said, "and she feared retaliation." "Or regret," I said. "She should not have acted alone." I nodded. "So what's our next move?" He glanced at the photo again, then at me. "You will find the remaining names on that spreadsheet. Determine which of them still work at the foundation. One of them sent this. One of them knows who bled that money. And one of them, perhaps the same, killed Voss not for power, but to keep the rot from surfacing." "You're saying we got the wrong motive?" "I'm saying," Wolfe replied, "Ellis Munro may have panicked, but someone else built the conditions for his panic. That is worse." The room felt heavier now, the air thick, like we were back at the start. Only colder, only deeper, because this time the pantry wasn't just where the body had ended up. It was where the evidence had been hidden. And we'd been given just enough to open the door again. This wasn't over. Not yet. I started with the names. There were 12 visible rows in the spreadsheet from the photo Gina, or whoever had taken it, had left us. 5 of the names were familiar: mid-tier program officers, foundation advisors, and one quiet finance director who'd kept his head down during every phase of the original inquiry. The remaining 7? Less so. 4 were contractors, 2 were listed as program liaisons, and 1, at the bottom, had no title next to her name at all. I ran them all through Wolfe's cross-reference index. That sounds more dramatic than it is. Really just an aging drawer cabinet in the office closet containing file cards, scribbled notes, and the occasional envelope that Wolfe insists holds context better than any algorithm. He's not wrong. By the time I was done, I had 3 likely sources and 1 name that didn't fit anywhere. Margaret Aslow. No job title, no ID number, but she'd been assigned a payment of $35,000 under something labeled Network Sustainability Emergency Grant. I brought it to Wolfe. "This isn't just sloppy," I said, handing him the typed sheet with my red-circled highlights. "It's invisible. They paid someone who doesn't exist or who doesn't want to be found." Wolfe tapped the paper. "And if we're meant to believe that Ellis Munro orchestrated a financial misdirection campaign large enough to siphon $500,000 over 2 years, while simultaneously mismanaging a panicked murder, we'd be fools. Gina didn't believe that either, I said. She gave us this, quietly, because she thought something deeper was buried. Something Daniel found, or was beginning to find, Wolfe corrected, and was silenced before he could speak. I picked up the folder of expense summaries. Should I bring this to Kramer? Wolfe grunted. You wanted more from this one? I wanted, Wolfe said, someone to have chosen murder for a reason beyond cowardice. I find panic unworthy of the effort it takes to dismantle it. You're a snob about motives. I am consistent. Still, I said, we solved it. Justice, more or less. Yes, he said, lifting his spoon, but not poetry. That was as close to sentiment as Wolfe got, and when he stood, it meant the subject was closed. I cleared the table, lingered in the kitchen long enough to let Fritz vent about the trout's resistance to butter, and returned to the office to find Wolfe already leafing through a monograph on Ecuadorian orchids like betrayal, death, and deception hadn't been wrapped around our Tuesday. Outside, summer went about its business. The heat kept rising. And somewhere in the city, Marlene Whitaker was preparing a public statement, Ellis Monroe was meeting his lawyer, and Gina Pavich was checking a flight confirmation in her inbox. Inside the brownstone, nothing had changed, and everything had. The following morning, I walked into the office with the intention of starting fresh. No corpses, no scheming board members, and no one trying to pass off passive neglect as innocence. But the universe, or maybe just New York, had different plans. Wolfe was already at his desk with a cup of beer that hadn't been sipped, which for him was the equivalent of a 5-alarm fire. His eyes weren't on his orchids, or his copy of the Orchidaceae of Mexico and Guatemala, or even the morning paper folded perfectly to the obituaries. They were on a small manila envelope in the center of the desk, not the one Gina Pavich had left. A new one. It hadn't been there yesterday. I noticed immediately because Wolfe doesn't tolerate mystery objects in his vicinity unless they come with exact provenance and preferably postage. I raised an eyebrow. We have a courier I don't know about. No, Wolfe said. Fritz found it on the stoop at 7:30 this morning. No knock, no bell, no return address. That was enough to bump it from curiosity to possible threat in Wolfe's book, though so far it hadn't exploded, emitted powder, or summoned the police. He nudged it forward with one finger. Open it. Thanks for the honor, I said, picking it up. The flap came loose easily. No glue, just a single brass clasp bent back. Inside was a single typed sheet and a photograph clipped to the top. I slid them out and read aloud. You looked in the wrong freezer. The real rot's still here. There was no signature. Just those 10 words. The photograph was a grainy image of a spreadsheet printed in black and white, captured on a phone screen that was shaking or sweating, or both. At first glance, it didn't mean much. A column of names, some dollar figures, a few color-coded notes that didn't translate well on paper. Wolfe extended his hand. I passed it over. He studied the image like it might confess under the pressure of his stare alone. This is not merely a threat, he said. It's an invitation. From who? That, he replied, is now your problem. It took me the better part of the day to retrace steps I thought we'd already buried. I went back to the annex, this time under the pretense of collecting leftover documentation for Foundation archives. I told the new interim office assistant I was working on the post-mortem review. She looked relieved to pawn the box of files off on someone else. Back at the brownstone, I examined the spreadsheet in the photo and started matching figures with the ledgers in the Kramer Foundation's real financial statements, the ones Gina had provided under the assumption that we were done with this business. Except we weren't. The numbers didn't match. A quiet $500,000 had been shaved from various grant disbursements and buried under line items that didn't exist on any of the board-reviewed reports. Not the fiscal year Daniel had died, the year before. I brought the files into the office and dropped them onto Wolfe's desk. You were right. Again, someone cooked the books. Wolfe leaned forward. Not Ellis Munro? None of these predate his influence. Someone with deeper roots. Wolfe tapped the spreadsheet photograph. The source. Still unknown. Could be Gina. Could be Marlene. Could be some junior accountant with a grudge and a conscience. Or, Wolfe said slowly, it could be Daniel Voss. I blinked. You think he left it? But the envelope could have been delayed, held or sent on his behalf. That gave me pause. The idea of Daniel Voss, posthumous whistleblower, rising from the pantry like a voice from the deep freeze. I'll find out who printed it, I said. Do, Wolfe murmured, but be discreet. I didn't need to be told. If someone had sent us this to reignite the fire, then we were being watched, or tested. I went back to the image. The angle of the shot gave away more than whoever took it intended. The reflection on the screen, barely visible, showed a partial office nameplate on the far wall. I zoomed in. 3 letters. P-A-V. Gina, I said. Wolfe closed his eyes and breathed in, not out. That's how I knew he was disappointed. She came back, he said, or never left. I checked her HR file. Still accessible through a back door she probably assumed no one else would know existed. Her official resignation date hadn't yet processed. She was technically still on the payroll. But she hadn't been in the building since the day she'd left us the first envelope, unless someone was helping her. I called her mobile. No answer. I emailed her Kramer Foundation address. Bounced. I tried her LinkedIn profile. Deleted. I even tried the private email she'd used when forwarding Wolfe the resignation memo. That got me a reply. Just one line. I was right to leave, but someone still has to clean the bones. Wolfe read it in silence. She knew, he said, and she feared retaliation. Or regret, I said. She should not have acted alone. I nodded. So what's our next move? He glanced at the photo again, then at me. You will find the remaining names on that spreadsheet. Determine which of them still work at the foundation. One of them sent this. One of them knows who bled that money. And one of them, perhaps the same, killed Voss not for power, but to keep the rot from surfacing. You're saying we got the wrong motive? I'm saying, Wolfe replied. Ellis Munro may have panicked, but someone else built the conditions for his panic. That is worse. The room felt heavier now, the air thick, like we were back at the start. Only colder, only deeper, because this time the pantry wasn't just where the body had ended up. It was where the evidence had been hidden, and we'd been given just enough to open the door again. This wasn't over. Not yet. I started with the names. There were 12 visible rows in the spreadsheet from the photo Gina, or whoever had taken it, had left us. 5 of the names were familiar: mid-tier program officers, foundation advisors, and one quiet finance director who'd kept his head down during every phase of the original inquiry. The remaining 7, less so. 4 were contractors, 2 were listed as program liaisons, and 1, at the bottom, had no title next to her name at all. I ran them all through Wolfe's cross-reference index. That sounds more dramatic than it is. Really just an aging drawer cabinet in the office closet containing file cards, scribbled notes, and the occasional envelope that Wolfe insists holds context better than any algorithm. He's not wrong. By the time I was done, I had 3 likely sources and 1 name that didn't fit anywhere. Margaret Aslow. No job title, no ID number, but she'd been assigned a payment of $35,000 under something labeled Network Sustainability Emergency Grant. I brought it to Wolfe. This isn't just sloppy, I said, handing him the typed sheet with my red-circled highlights. It's invisible. They paid someone who doesn't exist, or who doesn't want to be found. Wolfe tapped the paper. And if we're meant to believe that Ellis Munro orchestrated a financial misdirection campaign large enough to siphon $500,000 over 2 years, while simultaneously mismanaging a panicked murder, we'd be fools. Gina didn't believe that either, I said. She gave us this, quietly, because she thought something deeper was buried. Something Daniel found, or was beginning to find, Wolfe corrected, and was silenced before he could speak. I picked up the folder of expense summaries. Should I bring this to Kramer? Wolfe grunted. Not yet. We're not dealing with legal guilt now, Mr. Goodwin. We are dealing with architecture, who built the system that made Voss's death inevitable. Not who knocked the shelf, but who installed it badly in the first place. That was Wolfe. Always the structuralist. Always the one to blame the scaffolding, not the final crack. Then where do I start? I asked. Find the woman, he said. Margaret Aslow. If she exists, she holds the key. If she doesn't, someone thought that name would go unnoticed. Either way, she answers a question we haven't yet asked. I started in the obvious place. The Foundation's internal directory. Nothing. No Margaret Aslow. No Margie. No Maggie. Not as employee, grantee or consultant. Next, I hit the public grant disclosures filed annually for tax purposes. Still no Margaret Aslow. I tried the IRSEIN records. No independent non-profit or DBA had been registered under her name in the past 5 years. Not in New York, not in any neighboring state. Finally, I pulled property records and found a match in Riverdale, apartment 4C in a narrow grey stone 2 blocks from the park. The lease was under the name Margaret Aslow, signed 3 years ago, paid quarterly in full. The mailing address for billing? A Foundation P.O. box. I didn't tell Wolfe I was going. He wouldn't have stopped me, but he would have issued a caution in triplicate and told Fritz to prepare for hospital broth. Instead, I left a note on his desk, locked the office, and took the convertible up the Hudson side before rush hour could crawl over it. The building was quiet, not high-end, but clean. A woman in her 70s carrying a laundry basket let me into the front vestibule. I thanked her with a smile and pressed 4C. No answer. I waited a beat, then knocked. Still nothing. I slipped my card into the doorframe, something Wolfe disapproves of for its vulgarity and efficacy, and stepped back to wait. I gave it 5 minutes. I was turning to leave when I heard the lock click. The door opened 3 inches. A single eye looked out. Grey-blue, rimmed by fatigue that didn't sleep anymore. Yes, she said. Margaret Aslow? Yes. Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe. She opened the door wider, slowly. No surprise, no protest, just an odd stillness. I thought this might happen, she said. She let me in. The apartment was neat. Lived in, but orderly. A kettle sat cooling on the stove. 2 mugs sat clean in the sink. On the table, a newspaper lay folded to the financial section, an older edition from last week. I don't suppose you're here for tea, she said, sitting down. Not unless it comes with an explanation. She nodded. Of course. Sit. I did. She met my gaze. I worked for the Foundation years ago, she said. Never full-time. I was a quiet fixer. They had a leak in the budgeting process, and Daniel brought me in to plug it. So you're real, as real as any ghost. Daniel gave me a project stipend and kept me off the main books. When he tried to bring me on formally, the board refused, said it would look suspicious. So we created the emergency grant record, just to keep me funded. It was harmless. Until it wasn't. And the money, I asked. The extra $500,000? Her hands clenched slightly. That wasn't mine. It started showing up in the ledgers a year later. Daniel noticed. He started to trace it, told me not to speak of it. He said he'd handle it quietly, that we needed leverage before we accused anyone. Then he died. She nodded. I thought it was a coincidence, she said. Then I saw who replaced him, and who didn't fight it. And Gina. She found Daniel's notes. Not everything. Just enough. I told her to back away. She didn't listen. Then I saw your name in the paper. The brownstone. I knew you'd find the rest. I paused. Why not come forward yourself? She looked down. Because I was part of the shell. Even if I didn't steal, I helped build the silence. That's enough to make me complicit. Daniel knew it. So did Gina. We just picked different ways to live with it. I stood. We can protect you. If you speak now. She gave me a sad smile. I already did. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe didn't ask me what happened. He looked up once, saw my face, and reached for a fresh sheet of foolscap. Then we begin again, he said. And we did. Not for justice, not even for the sake of Daniel Voss, but because someone had installed the foundation's rot long before a body hit the pantry floor, and Wolfe never left a structure unfinished. The day had stretched long, but Wolfe's office remained a sanctuary of quiet calculation. The suspects and shadowy players had gone their ways, the board shuffled, and the city outside carried on, oblivious to the small drama played out in the shadows of a foundation's cold pantry. I sat across from Wolfe, the last notes of the case spread between us like a scattered puzzle. He had said little all afternoon, but I knew the slow gears in his mind were grinding toward the inevitable end. Finally, Wolfe folded his hands and looked at me with that rare, sharp gleam. "Mr. Goodwin," he began, "the time has come to unravel the final thread." I leaned forward, ready for the close. The murder of Daniel Voss was not a crime of passion nor of desperation. It was a tragedy born of a system engineered for silence, a carefully built lattice of omissions, obfuscations, and silent complicity. He slid the spreadsheet photo across the desk. This document, while seemingly innocuous, was the seed of destruction. Whoever sent it intended to expose not merely the theft of funds, but the rot that allowed it to fester. I nodded, thinking of Margaret Aslow, the ghost who had quietly funded the silence and borne witness to the corruption. Wolfe's eyes fixed on me. But the question remained. Who killed Daniel Voss? Who trapped him in that cold pantry and left him to freeze? I said Ellis Munro panicked. He feared discovery, but he did not initiate the decay. Wolfe smiled slightly. Precisely. He was a symptom, not the disease. He reached for the original report. The true architect of this crime was neither Ellis nor the board chair. It was the invisible hand behind the Foundation's financial veil, the one who orchestrated the siphoning, who silenced Daniel before his audit could bloom fully. I waited, the room narrowing in on Wolfe's next words. With evidence and testimony aligned, it falls on Janice Rowe. I blinked. Janice? Her access to Daniel's office was not merely accidental, Wolfe explained. She was complicit in the scheme and instrumental in its concealment. When Daniel confronted the irregularities, she acted, not out of loyalty, but self-preservation. I frowned, recalling her nervous denials. She followed him to the pantry. The lock was set to trap him, yes, but the real killer was the one who ensured the logs would be wiped, the evidence erased. I said, so Janice sealed his fate. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. She pressed the lock, yes, but she did not wield the blade. She chose convenience over conscience, turning a frozen pantry into a tomb. I exhaled, the moral weight settling in. And Marlene? A participant, but less culpable in action and more in inaction. She sought control, but not death. And Gina? Whistleblower, survivor, and witness to decay. Wolfe rose, signaling the end. We deliver justice not by vengeance, but by clarity. We have revealed the lattice and its weak links. Now the law will handle the rest." I stood, feeling the case's chill lift just a bit. Wolfe poured himself a glass of beer and offered one to me. "To cold pantries," he said quietly. "Where lies freeze, but truth eventually thaws." I clinked my glass. "And to those who dare to open the door." As the sun set outside the brownstone, the mystery closed behind us, leaving a silence that was not emptiness but resolution. A promise that even in the coldest places, the warmth of justice could be found.